الله أكبر الله أكبر حي على الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر.
Once again, I rise, giving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the highest of praise and the highest of honors to his holy and divine prophet, Noble Ali. I'd like to extend those honors to the harbinger, the forerunner, the honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey, who did warn and disturb the nations. I want to give honors to the Moorish American standard, the red flag with the green five-pointed star in the center, representing the highest principles known to man, which is love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice. Also want to acknowledge the United Mercantile Trading Banner, also known as the American flag. I want to give honors to all Moorish Americans, both past, present, and future, who strive to promote this holy and divine movement by way of the Prophet's holy instructions and divine laws. I want to give honors to Temple Number 19, the Office of the Grand Governor, the Assistant Grand Governor, or the Lieutenant Grand Governor, pardon himself, the Sheik staff, the admin staff, and the acting vanguard to keep the peace. And last but certainly not least, I want to give honors to you, the Ills and Bays and the Sacred Groves, and our visitors, sympathizers, because when man honors man, he honors our Father God Allah. Islam family?
Islam.
Once again, I want to give all praises due to Allah and the highest of honors for his holy and divine prophet, Noble Ali. And it is a blessing for us to be here on another holy day evening so we may continue to build on things that make us better citizens and reasons together. Islam family?
Islam.
So, being that we have a few visitors, if you will, in the groves, before I go any further, I want to open the floor up to any questions. We all men, we all brothers, there's no question that's taboo that you have about this Moorish Divine and National Movement, about our Prophet, Noble Ali, about the Moorish Science Temple of America, this holy and divine institution that was given to the Asiatics, also known as the so-called Negroes in America, for their national, with their divine and national salvation. So I'm gonna open up the floor for any questions at this time. How many of us have heard of Noble Ali? Never heard of Noble Ali before. This is your first time hearing about Noble Ali. Okay. What about you, brother?
Oh, I heard about him, but I don't know nothing.
Okay. All right. I know you're familiar with Noble Ali. Indeed. Well, let's start from that. Let's start from who is Noble Ali. Noble Ali was born Timothy Drew in the year 1886 in the state of North Carolina. And from that moment, in our scriptures, it is said that he was appointed by Allah to lead our people, to lead those who we refer to as Asiatics, also known as Moorish Americans. And in the mundane sense, they're also known, they're also classified as Negroes, Black Americans, African Americans. All right. He was appointed by Allah first and foremost because he was raised up amongst our people. When we talk about when we discuss the concept of a prophet, if we look into our scriptures, whether it be in the realm of the Ibrahimic or the Abrahamic scriptures, or when we even look outside of that, when we look at like the Far East, Zoroaster, Confucius, we want to go to Brahman, so on and so forth, we know, or even Buddha, if you will, we notice that these men, these vessels, if you will, were raised up amongst the people. They did not come from out of left field. They did not come from other lands, as you would, as it's likely to be perceived. The reason being, of course, is because you are more susceptible as a society, as that group of people, to receive the revelations from Allah, to receive the information that Allah has in store for you for your salvation from someone of your own. It also comes from the concept of a maliki, or a ruler. Generally, rulers are appointed. They're usually appointed by the people. They are raised up. And when you look at ancient cultures, they, in a sense, give up a portion of their rights and their freedom, almost enabling this ruler to be the representative, the so-called sovereign of the people. So when we talk about this concept of a quote-unquote sovereign people, or a sovereign, is not specific to an individual where it only represents the individual. You have two levels, or there's two parts to a sovereign. You have a sovereign nation or a sovereign people, meaning that they have been, what's the word I'm looking for? They have privileges, if you will, within the state that they live in, versus someone that is coming from the outside. Islam, brothers. All right, so they have sovereign rights, and then you have the sovereign ruler, if you will, that represents on behalf of that people. So if, for instance, this brother right here, Brother Matthew, was the sovereign ruler over us brothers over here, that means he represents the interests of who we are. All right, but then with that being said, we're also entrusting him with any information that we give to him, that, you know, when he goes out and he, you know, makes these business deals, or he makes any deals that will be beneficial of our people, that he's doing it within the interest. Any word that he says, we have to, if he has to send a word down, if he sees how we operate, if he observes and he looks upon us and how we operate, and he says, well, as a ruler, it's best for us to do it this way. Us being responsible and mature, we have to say, okay, well, if we appointed this brother, if we appointed this man, if we appointed this woman, if you will, if we appointed this ruler, then we have to have trust that what he says in the interest of our people has to work. Because if it doesn't, then why did we choose him to begin with? Did we just choose him for a time? Did we, you know, if that's the case, then how does that work? But going back to the concept of our prophet was appointed by Allah. In our scriptures of the Moorish Science Temple of America, he is an angel that was sent to bring the everlasting gospel of Allah. He was also sent to save our people from the wrath of Allah. All right? So what does that mean in particular? Does that mean hellfire and brimstone? Depends on how you look at it. It could be from our own demise. We all, to a certain extent, hear a still small voice, our conscious, or however you want to describe it, that gives us, or that recommends a better judgment. All right, and that is our spirit. It may tell us to go one way, and, you know, our ego may tell us to go another way. But the prophet, he reiterates the importance of listening to that still small voice. He reiterates that he's actually a manifestation of that still small voice, because the purpose of a prophet is to be a physical example of what you can accomplish by listening to that still small voice, listening to your conscience. That's why, according to the doctrine of the Moorish Science Temple of America, he is the love of Allah made manifest. Mm-hmm. Islam? So, Prophet Noble Ali was born 1886, state of North Carolina, and he veiled the form when he passed away in January 20th, 1929. Within that time, he established what we know now today as the Moorish Science Temple of America. Moorish Science Temple of America started off as the ancient Canaanite temple in 1913 AD in Newark, New Jersey. All right. At that time, he was looking to, for lack of a better phrase, gradually introduce our people to the concept of being of Moorish and Canaanite descent. I mean, he was going to do that, and he was doing that by way of the scriptures of the Torah, of the Psalms, of the Injils, of the Psalms. That's how he was going. He was looking to get our people acclimated to the concept of being descendants of Canaanites and ancient Moabites. Because prior to that, we all, even when we're in certain circles today, being that it's quote unquote Black History Month, the word or the thing that you hear in these circles is that we're descendants of slaves. That can be farthest from the truth. Why is that? Well, for one, slaves is a derivative of the term Slav. Czechoslovakia, what's another one, brother? Yugoslavia. There's a bunch of Slavs out there. So we know that these Slavs, if you will, are of a European descent. None of us, well, let me rephrase that. Regardless of what happened to our ancestors in the past, we are not descendants of Slavs. All right? Mm-hmm. We are descendants of Africans born in America. Specifically, we are descendants of Moroccans and born in America. All right? As Moorish Americans, if you will. But what our prophet was doing is removing the concept of being descendants of slaves or even being descendants of chattel property. Mm-hmm. Let's just remove, quote unquote, slaves out of it. During that time, we were saying that we were just descendants of chattel property. How can you be descendants of property? So that was even a lower class than the working class. So how are you being descendants of property? How do you gain the ability to advance in your life? How do you gain the ability to advance in society? All of us are intelligent brothers, and we more than, if anything, we're familiar or somewhat familiar with society abroad. And generally in society, they have a class system. So if you were born a carpenter, more than likely your family is going to be carpenters. If you were born a statesman or a politician, more than likely you're going to be within that class of a politician. So on and so forth. So just like think about this in the general, in the most mildest sense, if we were born and raised in the class of being property, then what's destined for us? Then to continue generations of being property. So that was one of the first things that our prophet had introduced to us, that we are not descendants of slaves, we are not descendants of property, we are not property at all. All right? We are descendants of a people that were the civilizers. We were the progenitors of civilization. Mm-hmm. We were descendants of Moabites, of Canaanites. Overall, we were descendants of Asiatics. We come from the Asiatic family, rather. Mm-hmm. The Asiatic family consists of anyone of olive hue, and we have different shades of olive hue in this room right now. Woolly to wavy hair. We are all part of one family. If we really pay attention to certain cultures and customs that are around the world, dealing with melanated people, dealing with people of woolly to wavy hair, olive tone, we'll see that there are only slight differences. Mm-hmm. I mean, if we really look at it, if we remove the ego out of it and analyze this thing from a scholarly perspective, and if we were to sit a good majority of Asiatic cultures or melanated cultures, for the sake of argument, if you will, side by side and compare and contrast, I guarantee you that we will have more in common versus the differences that we have. And I challenge anyone to debate me on that. All right? We may do things slightly different, but all in all, it's the same. How do I know this? How can I give you an example? Look at the Caribbean. Look at the West Indies. Look at how much they get along with each other. And they're supposed to be far removed. And I'm talking about far removed in the realm of, you have those that come from the quote-unquote African diaspora, and you have some that come from India. You have some that even come from Thailand, but they get along just fine. What's the difference? Or what would be the difference between West Indian food and East Indian food? Is there a difference? How many of us? Okay, I'll do you one better. Can anyone give me a major difference between West Indian food, East Indian food, and African food? Some spices. Some may add saffron, some may not add saffron. But it's the same because it's a relative culture. That's how we can tell. If I was to quote from one of our great scholars, the Honorable Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, just as a quick sidebar, when the Europeans began to traverse to different parts of the world, they noticed that everywhere that they went, it didn't look so different than the place that they came from. So they noticed that when they went from one island to another body of land, etc., everyone was of an olive hue. Everyone was of a quote unquote darker shade. Everyone had woolly to wavy hair. It was like, how is that? How is it happening? How is it that everywhere we go, and you can look at this, you can look at the writings. When the Columbus, Magellan, look at that, whatever they have documented, when it comes to going to the islands of Cuba, to Central America, they'll say it's very similar to that of what we've seen in Africa. Even over here in the United States, in Turtle Island. You know, they're talking about brothers that call themselves, I'm just throwing out a name for the sake of argument, of the Chippewa tribe, and they wear turbans with feathers. Similar to the princes and the sheiks that live in India. How is that? Customs do not alter the nature of truth. So that was the second thing that he reintroduced to us. That we were not property. We were not, or the third thing rather, we're not property. We're not descendants of Slavs. And we are of one whole family. But what Noble Drew Ali specifically had to do is he had to figure out a way, or he had to really listen to Allah. He had to sit within himself. And that's what he had to traverse. He had to go to the lands of India, Africa, and Europe, and Egypt. And he had to study. And he had to really look within himself and to get his purpose. And at the time that was appointed by Allah, the keys had to be open to who we are as a people. All right? There's no way, as much as we were desired to, that we can leave these United States. Because the blood itself is so mixed in, for lack of a better word, that we are just a part of this land as we are in Africa.
Islam.
Some of us have ancestry that didn't even come from Africa at that time, if you will. So how are we, melanated Asiatics living in America, how are we to establish ourselves living in the United States after 1865, during the time of the so-called emancipation, or of the emancipation rather? How are we to conduct ourselves once our captors just decided to let us go? I talk about Stockholm Syndrome all the time. And Stockholm Syndrome is really deep when it comes to our people, because you see certain levels and degrees of Stockholm Syndrome and PTSD. You see that amongst our people in the way we act, how in certain cases we desire to want what the European has and not wanting for ourselves. So our prophet, going back to being released, we were just released. We were emancipated, if you will. And what does it mean to be emancipated? That means as a minor, you have the right to operate as an adult. Not necessarily be that adult. So during that time, we didn't know which way to go. We only knew what we learned how to do. We knew we were somewhat industrious. And then you had brothers that came in, Booker T. Washington, Frederick Douglass, Edward Blyden, the list goes on of pioneers that came before our prophet Noble Drew Ali, messengers, if you will. Then came the forerunner, the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey, who took the lessons of those that I just mentioned and established the UNIA and gave us racial pride and say that we are a mighty people. Stand up, you mighty race. But the work of Allah, that was the act of purity. Purity meaning it had to pave the way, it had to open up the doors for something that was much bigger. So we had the foundation, if you will, because we had the pride. We had to recognize that once we were emancipated, we were self-conscious about ourselves. How many of us own a dog? Okay. What do you think will do? What do you think will happen if you would just let your dog go? If one day you would just tell him to leave the house and signal him to not come back?
Might walk off somewhere.
He might walk off somewhere.
He gonna run off.
He gonna run off? You don't think he'll come back?
He might.
If you so you trying to tell me as much as you feed your dog, you make sure your dog is warm, you wash him, you do all that stuff, you brush his teeth and all that stuff, and you just decide to let the dog go, that he ain't gonna come back? Because he ain't gonna know how to fend for himself.
True.
You see what I'm saying? And that was the condition that we're in. So the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey, he instilled within us self-sufficiency. He put all of that into one program of the UNIA. And hence the Universal Negro Improvement Association. Because we had to improve our condition. All right? But then we had to, not only did we have to improve our condition, but we had to make it known that we had just as much right of being in these United States as the Europeans who captured us and enslaved us and attempted to make us property. But in order to do that, we had to unite under one universal idea. We couldn't unite under the auspices of being a Negro, because that was putting us right back in the position that we were. We couldn't be a united group of people that were dead, people that wouldn't progress. And for us to individually attempt to, at that time, search for our quote-unquote point of origin. And see, that's the thing, that's the beauty of being a Moorish American. See, people think that the concept of being a Moorish American, saying that you're a Moorish American, that you are a descendant of that empire, that restricts you. But I challenge you once again to do your research and see how vast that Moorish empire extends. That's the beauty of that term Moorish. You do not have to even give up your practices. If anything, it will enhance your practices, because you will see it from a different perspective. You will see it from a much broader perspective, because you will see that a lot of your practices were derivatives of things that came before that. And you will see that how all of that was enjoined together. You will not only see that, but you will also understand how your ancestors practiced that. As I say all the time, and pardon me for those that have heard it before, it's not necessarily what the practice or the religious practice is, it's how we practice it as a people. Because that determines where our state of mind is and whether or not we're able to move forward. Again, this is something that I say all the time. The Chinese have so many different religions within that realm, within that nation. But at the end of the day, they're still what? They're Chinese. They have not forgotten about that. They are all up in the masjid speaking Arabic, Cantonese, Mandarin. What's another language in China? That's all I know of right now. But I know definitely Mandarin and Cantonese and Arabic. What was it? I heard in that particular realm, I spoke to our Grand Sheik about this a few days ago. They have a national Islamic, a Latin Islamic Association of Atlanta. You know, so in that particular circle, they're speaking Spanish and Arabic, because it behooves them not to know the language of that ancient scripture. So the point that I'm making is that Moorish does not take away from anything that you already are as a people, but what it does, it allows us to galvanize and centralize a specific idea. Because that's all that nationality is. It's an idea and it's a code that people of that particular descent adhere to. It's a universal code. And within that universal code, you're going to have certain ways to demonstrate that, for lack of a better word, but as long as it's being executed properly, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if I was to stand on, quote unquote, stand on my square, if I do it this way or if I do it this way. Just because my feet is extended a little bit more, it doesn't matter, as long as I have my feet at a 45. You know, if I press your hand and I demonstrate the concept of being bound, whether or not I say wisdom, will, and love, or I say nothing at all, it's still the universal principle of showing how we are bound by cords, how we represent the hubble of Allah, the rope of Allah. So, Noble Drew Ali, in so many words, returned to us our divine creed and our nationality. He returned to us the divine creed of Islamism. Islamism predates the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salam. It predates Abraham alayhi salam. Islamism has been around since Allah created man on this plane of manifest. Moorish Science Temple of America operates by way of the Moorish Divine and National Movement. It's a mobilization program. It has us as Moorish Americans and those that believe and sympathize with this Moorish Divine and National Movement, and enables us to be a part of our communities. Because that is the true definition of citizenship, helping your community to progress. Because other than that, you're just consumers, useless eaters. When we think about, as brothers, and we should, think about how much money that you give outside of your community. How much of that money comes back into your community? Think about how much money that you spend individually. An exercise that I encourage you all to think about the next time you go out. I want you to tally up how much money you may have spent in a day. And then think about how much longer it's going to take for you to make that money back. Now, if you spend that money just as fast as you're making it back, 9 times out of 10, you may want to change your spending habits, or you may want to develop another stream of income. Because we can no longer afford to become a society of consumers. Because consumers will do just that, it'll consume. We won't be a part of the progression. Because the only thing we know how to do is give out. And not have anything reciprocated. But again, that's the mentality that we have, coming from the idea that we're descendants of property. Islam? So, with that, I want to yield the floor. I'm going to yield the floor to our brother Yosef. All praises are due to Allah, and highest of honors to His holy and divine prophet, Noble Drew Ali. Gratitude once again for our brother Yosef and Fail Ill and his demonstration of our divine and national movement. I want to add on to a couple of things, and then I'll yield the floor to our next speaker. I mentioned earlier our prophet Noble Drew Ali stating that we are Moorish Americans because we are descendants of Moroccans born in America. I want to go just a tad bit deeper into that, and not really into the concept of Moroccan, but the term of descendant. Because when we think of descendant, we automatically associate that with the genealogy of something. But when you descend, essentially, literally means to come down. When you ascend, of course, you go up. So with us saying that we're descendants of Moroccans, we're talking about that point of origin. And during the time that we as Moorish Americans were descendants of Moroccans, we're referring to the Moroccan or the Moorish Empire, being that the Morocco was at that time the capital of the Moorish Empire, or in other words, it was known as Al-Maghrib. In certain times of the Moorish movement, it was also known as Al-Maqsid. So with all of that, that Moorish Empire, again, if we were to look at a map of antiquity, I think the earliest map we were able to find, or that I was able to find rather, was around 15, around the late 1500s. And even there, the map was done by a Portuguese and a French cartographer. And he was able to lay out the areas of the Moorish Empire. And it gives a difference between, it literally would say Moorish Empire, it'll say East Sudanese, not East Sudanese, Western Sudanese, which, you know, interestingly enough, we would think that the concept of Sudan was only something of the East, where there, you know, that whole part of Africa, that middle part, if you will, Central Africa, was known as the West Sudan, or as the Sudan, or as the quote-unquote the dark area. But again, going back to the Moroccan or the Moorish Empire, if we were to go to this map, you know, we all know that Morocco is right here. But again, this was the capital of that empire. So that goes, as we as Moorish Americans know, that extends to Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, Nigeria, Mali, Mauritania, the Western Sahara, Senegal, Burkina Faso, Guinea, the Ivory Coast, Ghana, Nigeria, this whole area. In short, the northwestern and southwestern shores of Africa. That and that is something that our prophet Noble Drali also states. So he ultimately gives a deeper explanation. He says we're descendants of Moroccans and born in America, but he also says to expound upon that and to elaborate, he says that the Moorish Americans are descendants of the ancient Moabites who inhabited the northwestern and southwestern shores of Africa. All right. So again, you know, if any of us was to say, well, you know, I'm not a descendant of Moroccan, I went to 23andMe, I went to African Ancestry, and I found out that, you know, my ancestry was from Ghana or from Boko Faso. Look at what they were between the times of 711 and 1610, and you'll see that they were under the ancient Moorish Empire, more than likely Mali or the Songhai. Islam? So, for me, there seems to be a common theme for this evening, and with that, I just want to follow up with some words from the Prophet, and then we'll go into some announcements, and then I'll bring up our final speaker for this evening. And this message is coming from the Moorish literature, a compilation of short articles from the Moorish Guide that was written by our Prophet Noble Ali and his constituencies. This comes from an editorial reading a divine warning by the Prophet for the nations, and I'll be just reading one small paragraph in part. It says, the citizens of all free national governments according to their national constitution are of one family bearing one free national name. Those who fail to recognize the free national name of their constitutional government are classed as undesirables and are subject to all inferior names and abuses and mistreatments that the citizens care to bestow upon them. And it is a sin for any group of people to violate the national constitutional laws of a free national government and cling to the names and principles that delude to slavery. Islam? So, whether we we like the condition that we're in or not, we are American citizens. And the very idea, or for us to rather to attempt to remove ourselves from that identity, is what hurts us, because we put ourselves in a position where we're not even developing a system to support ourselves.
It's not shit.
See, when we talk about being a Moorish American, we're essentially talking about adhering to the Constitution, but we're also interpreting it in a way from our forefathers. We're giving our forefathers demonstration, because as American citizens, we have the right to do so. We have the right to establish prosperity in these United States of America, in the U.S. of A. But when you continue to refer to yourselves as something that does not exist, that is finite, that is an illusion, because the concept of being a black American is an illusion. Because where is the black culture? Where is the black food that we talk about? We have a quote-unquote black caucus, but amongst the black caucus, amongst the federal quote-unquote black caucus, where are its branches? Why do we not hear about those things? So, to the brother Yonathan's point, it is time for us to develop a mature mindset. Not just a mature mindset, but as I would say, going back to the mindset of our forefathers. Because when we continue to move in the mindset of those who oppressed us, this form of individualism. I want to touch on something real quick, and I promise you I'm going to yield the floor. So in my readings and my research, I came across a concept today where there's an individual, if you will, that is looking to start a movement of denial of childbirth. Let me explain that to you.
Yeah, explain that to you.
So basically, there's an individual that wants to sue his parents for being born because he didn't give consent.
Wow.
Then how was the parents supposed to know that he wanted to be born? Did not want to be born. Either or. Let's really think about this idea. How did your forefathers think? Versus how we're groomed to think now. The way that we're groomed to think is so juxtaposed that anything remotely that is a reminiscent of order to the masses translates as restriction. As I don't want to be a part of that because I don't want to be a part of it. We get to a point now where we don't even know who we are. Now we're looking to rebuke the very parents that birthed us. So we're about to lose now is being introduced the concept of the blessing of childbirth. Removing the concept of the blessing of childbirth. How does that work? So if someone can sue their parents for being born, who's to say there won't be a group of people or an individual that'll coax a group of people to say, let's sue the churches, let's sue the masjids, the synagogues, the mosques, the temples, because they represent a deity that created us, and we didn't choose to be here.
Come on now. Wow.
So now you have a group of people that's going against Allah. Because they don't understand the blessing of what it is to be born on this plane of manifest. And that goes back into the chapter of the pinnacle of wisdom. How are you to say, I wish I was never born?
Come on.
Come on, Sheik.
Or to say, I wish I never existed. But that is the frame of mind that's gradually rearing its ugly head into society. And we have to be careful not to grab onto everything that sounds taboo or could just can be a notion that we can grab on because it sounds interesting. So I just wanted to share that with you, but to go back and on track. We are American citizens. And as American citizens, we have a right. It is our responsibility to ensure the prosperity of this nation. Now that may rub a few people the wrong way, but let's really think about it. If we don't like something, what you gonna do? You change it. It's that simple. So if you don't like how your community is working, change it. If you don't like how your educational system is working, change it. We do it with everything else. If we don't like a car, we go out and get a new car. If our shoes is busted, we go get a new pair of shoes. But why is that so simple? Because we have control over it. And when the only thing we have to convince is ourselves. To the point where now we're removed from communicating with each other. But that's why we're here. So I can dialogue with you and build a relationship, and we can share ideas, and I can say, look, brother, this educational system is folly. You know what, brother? I was thinking the same thing. The sisters around the corner was thinking the same thing. But let's do our own thing. I'm tired of these potholes on the street. Let's fix the situation. Oh, well, the city's saying they don't got no funding. That's okay. There's a Lowe's up the street. Something called Quick Creep that we can use. But we got to roll up our sleeves. We got to prove ourselves worthy of not being under this state of servitude. We have to essentially do for self. Islam families? But it takes a maturity level for us to get out of that. That's why I say being a consumer is almost hazardous to our health. Well, we're not reaping the benefits or knowing what it is to receive something. Because we're too busy forking it out. Islam family.
Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Hayya ala salah. Allah.